One of the foundations that the scope and sequences are based on is this concept of taking whole to part, rather than looking at the parts and going back to the whole. It's just really a bit of a tweak in thinking and encouraging that deep sense of number and understanding how many in the whole and how that can be represented by its parts, that a whole can be together and pulled apart and put back together again. So if we think about the concept of taking whole to part, and being able to see the whole first and then look for the parts within this to understand how the whole can be made up in various ways. What this does is it leads to a flexibility with number. Starting from the whole helps children understand that that whole can be made up in different ways. And it's the wooden patterns that help children to establish this firm sense of this whole and create a visual reference point for these. And that's what those patterns do. They create just a strong visual anchor point that I know the pattern for 3. I understand that's 3. When I'm thinking of 3, that's what I think about. I can move it around, I can see it as its parts, but I have a really strong visual reference of that whole. And this visual reference point allows children to move really quickly from concrete to abstract. They understand a whole can be decomposed and composed in a variety of ways, so broken apart, put back together in a variety of ways. And they understand a numeral is just simply a symbol for this amount, this whole amount. And so they have that anchor point to work with. I know what 3 is, I understand that that is 3, is simply a symbol for this amount. So if you look at this image below, you are far more likely to count this to work it out. This image, although it's a whole, it's arranged into a line and it doesn't give us a really strong anchor point for a whole at all. However, if we reflect on this, if you have an anchor point for 5, which the wooden pattern strongly gives you, it's easy to see that this is 7. And what this does also, which I love about the wooden patterns, is they link to finger patterns. So I can see that 7, I understand 7. I can use it and link it to tens frames as well with the 5 and the 2. I can see it as a whole 7 based on this wooden pattern, but I can easily decompose it, pull it apart in a variety of ways. Knowing that while I might pull it apart into different parts, 2 parts, 3 parts, 4 parts, 7 parts, it will still be 7, no matter what I do. As long as I don't physically take something away or physically add, it's still going to be that whole that was 7 that I have that reference point for, but I can pull it apart in various ways. So these wooden patterns give children an important understanding of the benchmark amounts of 5 and 10. The 5 and 10 we talk about being the most important numbers to start with. That sense of 5 and finding 5 to get to a 10 is crucial for children in the scope and sequence. And so building those patterns up to 5 really solidly is super important. And working with 5, starting from the whole, I can easily see that this is 4 and 1, right? I could even turn 3 over to another colour and see the 3 and 2. I can do that within the pattern, so I can see the parts within the pattern itself. Here I can see the triangle and the straight line that makes the 5. I understand the triangle is the reflection of the whole for 3, and I know the straight line is the reflection and my anchor point for 2. And so then I can see easily that that is made up of 3 and 2. That is still 5. It doesn't matter how I move it around, what I change around. What that does in that strong sense of 5 is when we get up to understanding teen numbers, we're understanding that 13 and 2 would be 15. We have that strong reference point to hold on to. And so we know that 10 is a vitally important benchmark number. We have a base 10 system. So having a strong image of 10 allows me to establish how this whole can be made up, and it leads to really strong foundations when working with larger amounts. I need this sense of 10. I need to be able to pull apart this 10 and see it in its parts. in its bonds, 2 parts, or in more than 2 parts. That leads to more complex thinking with bigger numbers later on. So I can easily see that this, although I haven't moved my 10 around, I've flipped some over, I can see it's 8 and 2. That's going to make it easy when I come and I've got a deep sense of that base 10 system, of the 10ness, and so when I come to understanding that AT is made up 8 10s, I will understand that 20 is made up of 2 10s, so 80 and 20 is going to be 10 10s, which is 100. So this thinking, this whole part thinking, leads us quite quickly into more complex thinking as well. And here I can see 6 and 4. I haven't moved anything around, but I can see the pattern, I can see the square. I can see a dot for 1 and I can see a 5. I can see how those parts are made up. I can see that 6 and I can see the square. 6 and 4 leads me to more complex thinking. If I've got a really strong sense of 10, 6 10s, 4 10s, 6 and 10s and 4 10s, or 10 10s, 100. So working a whole to part allows a deeper number sense. It allows a real flexibility with number as well. Once you have those anchor points to 10, those patterns that are set, and you've linked them to other ways of being, so we can link them to finger patterns, we can link them to tens frames, we can link them to Numicon. Once you've got those strong anchor points, then children quickly move off into more complex thinking with large numbers, coming back to those whole to part patterns which they have deeply embedded. Working whole to part, allowing that deep number sense, is incredibly effective for all children, but it is really important for children with specific math struggles. If we think dyscalculia or just specific difficulties in maths. That strong visual reference point and an understanding that the whole can be expressed in a variety of ways is really important for progress. So, when you are starting out with the scope and sequence, and you are, because this video is intended to be part of that PLD and understanding why I've chosen the wooden patterns, I chose the wooden patterns because as a person with specific math struggles myself, whether it be undiagnosed dyscalculia or just a specific struggle with maths, these patterns have changed the way I see things. They have really wired my maths brain in a different way. And so it's really crucial that those first sessions that are dealing with 1 to 5 aren't skipped over. And it's also important that even if you're introducing this to slightly older children, perhaps who've been at school, maybe they're older year ones, perhaps you've got a year 2 class and you think, where am I going to start? You're always going to start with the sessions that are going to introduce these patterns, and you're going to reinforce and consolidate those patterns, because believe me, they are very, very crucial. My children are 1 session away from completing the scope and sequence at the moment. We are still coming back to those patterns constantly, drawing on, okay, what is 8 and 2? 8 and 2 is 10. Okay, so tell me about 80 and 20. How are we going to use that to solve 83 and 24 or whatever? Tell me how we can use 6 and 4 to help me solve 600 and 400. What am I going to know about that? So a deep sense of those wooden patterns that hold apart is super, super crucial, and it shouldn't be skipped over. Take time to get to know these patterns. Children need to see them like this, but also just represented in their shape form. So 3 counters but arranged into a triangle, but also just as a triangle shape. Again, you're looking for that visual anchor point that will help them move through from concrete to a more abstract with a really strong visual anchor point, that whole thinking. I can have that hole in my head and I'm manipulating it. I'm moving it around. I'm letting it help me, that deep sense of numbers to 10, because it's so vital for further on, more developed thinking. Hold apart thinking is also really important with fractions, and I've found because my children have that strong sense of that whole, fractions come more naturally. because we're thinking about that whole and it being separated into those equal parts and what part, and because they have that whole to part thinking, it comes quite naturally. So part of your PLD for working in this scope and sequence, for getting to know the scope and sequence, for teaching it effectively, is getting to know these patterns, being explicit with your teaching, not skipping over these and thinking that they're easy, and frequently coming back to them. But also watching out for the children that don't embed these quickly. They need repeated practice with this. They need to hold the maths in their hands. They need to move it around. Some children will not move to a pictorial representation as quickly as others. They still need to physically get the counters out, to move them around, to turn them over. So your understanding of that is really crucial as well. Hey, I hope that was useful. Please, as always, just ask if you have any questions about that process. Ka kite.